Please be seated.
The witness just ran to the restroom for the
All right.
Is it okay if he just goes through this from there?
You have questions you want to ask him, or you just?
Well, what I was gonna ask him to do is explain to the court, the methodology that he used in, developing, the timelines that he's gonna present, and also establishing the distances that the court had questions about.
All right.
Okay, before I look at a scene, if there's information available, I basically see if the scene's could have been affected by anything. If you want to go through and play the videos, but these are dash cam videos from some of the responding officers, and they show the EMS truck driving down the yellow brick road. They show a couple other vehicles pulling in around the crime scene and people walking in around the crime scene. So I'm just trying to understand what outside influences may have been in effect before the crime scene was worked or during the crime scene. So this is basically depicting some of the photos. People are standing on the other side of the yellow line. That's where the majority of the evidence was found. So just have an understanding of what's coming. The taser evidence, I won't play the animations. I heard most of this already. That's the first, this is a series of slideshows. That's the first one. These are big files. It takes a minute to load. The second one, knowing what may have happened based on what we just looked at, is to establish the location of the evidence and chart it along the path of the incident. So if we take a look at that, we want to anchor the timeline to the scene. We want to establish the taser number 1's location. This is a crime scene diagram, and they use reference pulls. I just basically showing the jury what the reference pulls were. They chart the evidence based on those reference pulls and the measurements made to locate each piece of evidence. They pull a tape from the pull to the piece of evidence or the marker, and they log it on this table. So those are just referencing the polls that were used for marker 1 and marker 2, which is what we're going to talk about right now. Just to give the jury an idea of where these polls are, this is reference pull RP4. There's RP4 and RP8. There's 8, 3, and 2 down the path of the yellow brick road. So the measurements charted on the crime scene diagram was from RP4. Marker 1 should be 33 feet 5 inches, sorry. And from RP3 it should be 74 feet 6 inches. That's the scene photo of marker 1. These are the related evidence. Marker 1's really a debris field, and when you look at what's around it, both if you zoom in on the sled stuff, you can see additional stuff. So we see the marker, we see the little paper envelope, and it's covered in an aphid. There's another aphid shown next to it to the left. There's the taser door. Both taser doors are shown there. So one represents basically a debris field.
Your Honor, just for the court's information, I don't know if you can see it or not, but all of the photographs are in evidence and their numbers are included at the bottom of each frame.
All right.
Now looking closer, I've spent a lot of time on these photographs, zooming into not quite the pixel level, but darn close. I found additional evidence that, if you look close, you can find these yellow circles mark other aphids. So just going to the next step, there's an aphid, there's an aphid, there's an aphid, there's an aphid. I was talking about earlier that the sled photos are nicely done for the most part. The resolution's good. You can actually zoom in on this aphid and pull off the identifying number on the back of it, which will come into play. This is just some exemplar aphids showing that they're all marked unique to that cartridge. So what we did is we basically said, okay, let's duplicate the measurements from the crime scene diagram out at the field. So we put a laser measurer on top of the tripod. We have a plumb bob hanging down, straight down. And we took the measurements. We're going 33 feet 5 inches, 74 feet 6 inches.
33 feet.
I'm sorry, 33 feet 5 inches, 74 feet 6 inches. It's a 1/8 there, a 16th there. So we placed marker underneath that plumb bob. And that's another photo of where it ended up. We did the same thing for number 2. And that is, we looked at the offset from each pole. Number 2 is a taser wire with a probe. It's supposed to be 62 feet 2 inches from RP4, 43 feet 8 inches from RP8. There's only one photo, a couple photographs showing number 2. There's no close-ups. So basically we're looking at one of the better photos with marker number 2, identifying unrelated glove there. Marker 2's offset or off the screen to the left there. Again, spend a lot of time going down at the zoom level, looking at these photographs. No manipulation, no enhancements, just looking closer. I basically found part of the taser wire, and you can see it in the pull out there. It's highlighted in black down in the main photo, and that's highlighted in black on the call out there, just to establish that, hey, there was at least a taser wire at that location. That was its path. The gaps there, I'm not going to fill in, but there were gaps pretty probably, I just didn't find it. Then we located the marker based on the measurements. We said, okay, RP4, RP8, there's the measurements, 62.2, 43.8, drop the plumb bob, put the marker down. This gives an idea of the path that Santana took before he actually shot the video. just showing his path, and it's showing where the yellow brick road relationship, just to give the jury a spatial relationship there. This is the path of Mr. Scott and Mr. Slager, and Santana's path up the parallel alleyway. Identifying that points along that line, he was taking video. We used a drone to fly the incident path. That was one of the reasons we went out there 3 times, was authorization to fly it, but we eventually obtained it. This is the video of the drone flying the incident path, which will be used in the animation later on. I won't play the whole thing, unless you'd like me to. Okay. This is going to be one of the components of the animation later on that you'll see in the end product. And there's some of our placed evidence markers that we'll talk about in a little bit. So the foot chase portion starts, of course, when Mr. Scott flees his car, and the timer on that, on my timeline, is 9:36:09, and that's based on the patrol car video and cam or dash video. The first physical evidence is Taser 1. Now, I wasn't here for the testimony of the gentleman from Taser, the clock drift. Well, I made one final adjustment to that, and that is to match the Taser sound on Santana's phone at the very beginning. So I pulled it basically 3 seconds to match that up, knowing I anchored the dash cam video to the dispatch back to Santana's. So the start point for the foot chase portion of the timeline, I'm getting that from Slager in the car video and lapel mic. He starts, I overlay a timeline or a time on the road. So we have the clock on the road now. We inserted the 2 cars up at the, not quite top left, because they were there at the scene that day of the incident. There's a verbal warning between 9:36:17 and 9:38, so we call that out. Taser, taser, taser is called out from 9:36:23 through 9:36:26. Then we reach the first taser, and that's based off of what I just showed you. The adjustment of the taser based on align it with the last piece of evidence, which is the Santana audio. The taser will go off for 5 seconds. The red denotes the 5 seconds, 9:36:29 through 9:36:34. We know that based on the taser log evidence. There's some inserts about the evidence found at number 1. Number 1 is basically a debris field. It's got aphids, doors. Establishing taser number 2's location. We go back to the crime scene diagram. There's 3 pieces of evidence that relate to that. Marker 3 is the taser door, 4 is cartridge, wire, probe, and aphid, 5 is the taser door. And they're sort of clustered there at point F right there. So we go back to our chart of what reference they're using RP2 and RP3 for all 3 of those markers. So here's a crime scene photo of that marker 3 we're going to start with. And there's a close-up or zoom in of that same photo. Now, what happened, and I didn't include the photos here, when we did the laser distance, plumb bob to the marker, put it down, and compared it to the crime scene photos, it didn't match. And we had talked about Farrell already. We had an idea of, there's a question as what the reference was. Was it the center of the phone pole? Was it the outer diameter? So what we ended up having to do is basically take these close-ups on the left of this crime scene photo and find those same rocks in the yellow brick road and place our marker according to the physical properties of that yellow brick road. So what we see in the circles are rocks with a unique pattern that we use to line our marker, and we show it a different way right here. There's a close-up of the actual crime scene photo, and there's ours showing the same rocks. Now, we weren't trying to do traditional or exact photogrammetry here, but it's not too bad. You can see the rocks right underneath the placard. Change, you're talking about that pair of rocks. There's a chipping event in the cyan circle. Over to the right, there's the red circle with the rock. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. And then down at the bottom where the taser door was, there's another rock. So we use that methodology to line all of our markers once we recognize that putting them based on either the ferrule or the crime scene diagram was going to introduce error to what they actually were. So we did the same thing for marker 5. We located it, spent a lot of time on our knees. Same thing with marker 4. Now, there's an aphid up to the, almost directly above marker 4. One that wasn't called out, we did that basically by zooming in and finding it. There's a bunch of other aphids we found by paying close attention to the detail. There's marker number 4 in a closer view, and there's the same process applied to it. And what we were able to do is basically look at marker 4. It has a unique ID number on the back of it. Look at the aphid that was captured in the sled photo and one that was taken during our exam of the physical evidence at the sled office, and show that it's a match. The aphids back at 1 and 2, or especially 1, matched the cartridge marked by evidence marker 4. It doesn't match the aphid collected with marker number 4. It's a different ID number. So they don't match. Marker number 4, again, spending a bunch of time zooming in on it. I was able to trace the wire, taser wire, off the screen to the left. And I was able to locate the probe for that wire in multiple photographs. Here's one here. There's another one there. And this one's the best one right here. You can actually see it in the zoomed in photo there, nice shiny cylinder object. So I was able to continue the charting of the wire for the taser. On this photo, I couldn't connect it totally. There just wasn't enough detail. But it gives an idea that it comes from what we saw in the previous photo over into this photo. And there's the probe from marker number 4. So using what we just talked about, we can link together evidence marker 1, evidence marker 2, to evidence marker 4. And it gives us a fairly complete set of that taser represented. Both probes are represented, a number of aphids are represented, so it's a good collection. Now we know this is a 25-foot taser based on the color coding of the panels, so we know the probes are going to be 25 feet. Looking at marker number 4, the photo there is the evidence that we looked at. Sled, one of the wires is not there. The exemplar demonstrative off to the right there shows 2 wires, just to give the jury what they should be seeing. When we participate in the examination, not touching, but visually or photographically documenting it, we asked that it be unwound to see or verify that it was a one piece of wire and probe, and the end result was it was. So marker number 4 had a 25-foot lead and ended in a connected probe when you took the time that the sled agent did to make that happen. When we undid marker number 2, not we, the sled agent, basically stretch it out, we found that it also was 25 foot, so it made sense that it came out of the cartridge, and we had a full collection. We weren't missing any wire. So that brings us to the timeline segment number 2, which is based on 93629 to 3642, and that is taser 1 activation to taser 2 activation. We're back to an aerial view to give an idea with the overlay timeline of the clock on the road. And we're just identifying a couple of things, the taser warning, the yellow brick road. And we're going to take a close look at this area right here. And when you do that, we know that taser 1 was a 5-second based on the taser log. That's marked off to the right there. We know that he had to change, Mr. Slager had to change the cartridge between Taser 1 ending and Taser 2 starting. So it's identified in the, I'll call it magenta, changes cartridge. And then there's a warning right in the 93640 range based on the audio. And then based on the Taser log, the Taser 2 would be occurring 93642. So here's the 3D perspective based on the drone flight that's showing the same thing. We're ending Taser 1 at 93634.
So you're ending,
I'm sorry. We're ending Taser number 1 at 93634. And then nobody knows where in the point of time that occurred, the change of Taser cartridge. We're given, it's in this range. Then you get the next, which is the warning and the actual Taser number 2. And then we move on to the next segment, which is establishing a location of pre-shooting struggle, 93642 to 93749, using the scene evidence. Go back to the crime scene diagram. Marker 6 is the blue hat, 7 is the wall and the watch. There's the crime scene photos. There's 6 with a close-up. Here's our same match we used earlier as far as putting our marker into the scene. 7, wallet watch, same process. And this is bringing in 3, 4, and 5, and then 6 and 7. We've seen that. It just shows an example of what the evidence was of each of those markers. We're back to the wire from 4 and moving over to where it ends in this crime scene photo here. And back to those photos I showed you earlier. That shows the probe. And then just giving a perspective view of this is the area where all that evidence was found. And that represents a projection of a 25-foot Taser probe distance or wire lead distance from the point of where we said Taser 2 took place. So it overlaps that area there. So then we move to evidence marker 16, which is the second Taser cartridge, which was found near Mr. Scott. And there's a photo of it right there. Approximate location of the struggle back behind the cruiser sitting there with 16 in the same photo. There's another shot of 16. We do the same process. We can't do anything with rocks or pebbles or physical geometry because we're in a dynamic location. So we basically took the numbers as they were stated on the crime scene diagram. There's just another view of it. There's a close-up of 16 showing that there are 2 leads coming off of the cartridge. We see that the AFIT collected with marker number 4 actually matches marker number 16 when you look at the serial number. And then when we look at everything related to Taser 2, we see that we have 3 and 5, which are the Taser doors. We have at least 1 AFIT collected, plus the other ones I showed that we found looking at it closer. We have the cartridge, and we have 1 probe that was in Mr. Scott. So if we do the same thing we saw earlier on cartridge 1 or Taser 1, when we had the sled agent take the cartridge from marker 16 and stretch out the first wire, it ended at 67.6 inches. Then there's a free 231-inch piece of lead, and when you add that up, it's 24 foot 9 inches. The probe was separate, so when you add that up, it pretty much is 25 feet. So that lead we were able to complete. When the sled agent did the same process for the remaining, we found 64.25 inches. Then it ended, there was a break there. Then the free piece she found, or she unwound, was 166.5. You were missing 69.6 inches and 1 probe that was not in the evidence. So that's the result of that. That's that section. Okay, chapter 3 is establishing location Slager's got during the shooting. The shooting, camera matching Slager's and Scott's position. So this is the video as it was shot, real time, no enhancement, it's just demonstrative, show what we're working with. This is shot 1, frame capture, 455. And it shows Slager, of course, to the right, and Scott to the left, and it was identified based on looking at the original video and the sound wave versus the action in the video. We pulled this frame out. This became our match frame. Now, frame 455, let me back up. You can see at the base where the feet are blurry. I actually chose 456 because it cleared up the feet, which is going to be my reference point somewhere near the feet. And it also shows that there wasn't a change in the foot's position during that. So that's 456. I superimposed lines to the fixed objects in the scene. We see a line around the tree. We see the telephone poles marked. We see the fence marked. And at least it's not a horizontal line, but a line across the road.
And is this part the reverse?
Yes. This is the reverse projection photogrammetry. Call it a cheat sheet, and that is I'm going to use this as an overhead. Well, before I get there, the scene changed another way, and that is the neighbors to the pawn shop put up a rather obstructive high fence that made getting to the Santana's location a little more difficult because, of course, he was on this side of the fence. We worked around that. So there's our reference sheet, and when we take away the shot 1 diagram, we're left with, hey, there's some visual references. So you print this out in transparency, and you put it on a monitor, and you take that monitor with you to the scene to output the cell phone video or video feed to this to use it as your alignment tool, rather than to try and deal with the little screen on the phone itself. So here's some examples of attempts to line it up. So we see the scene on the day, this is December 17th, and you can see things alter a little bit as far as the position of the photo versus the reference lines. The lighting, of course, changes because it's different times of day, but you work with it until you get what you feel, and yes, it is subjective, a camera match. And you go back and forth and say, did you get it? Did you get it? And
What are you switching back and forth?
shot 1 right there, and my camera match right there.
So, no, slide 14 is a cutout. That's not the video.
That's the cutout, yes. Both of those are cutouts.
All right, and then where is the video matched frame?
It is 13.
Okay, so 13 and 14 are now matched.
In my opinion, yes.
Well, I mean, you can look at it and tell, right?
In my opinion, yes. I mean, I think anybody, I showed it to multiple people at the scene, and they said, looks good. So, yes. So that was the match.
13 is from the video itself,
Right,
and 14 is your recreation.
yes. So to demonstrate that you can see adjustments to either figure, the first one was moved 1 inch. Now, in reviewing all this, coming to come to court, I reviewed the work, I had my helper out there moving it. Even though it says 1 inch up there, this is actually comes closer to 2 inches when you're looking at how far it moved. But the point is that there's the movement right there, that's 2 inches, and you can note the difference. I did the same thing for the next one, which says 2 inches, actually 3. And the next one, which is 3, it's really like 3.5. But that's to demonstrate that, hey, you can see small changes in the position of the silhouettes, and that factors into what kind of an error rate that I establish or assign it when I'm all done. So Slager's position, Mr. Slager's, pardon me, was right here.
lined up, the telephone poles lined up, Mr. Scott in the position on the video, Mr. Slager in the position on the video, you then set out to measure.
Yes.
Is that
Yes.
how that works? And you can see, I mean, anyone can see from shot 61 to 62, or slide 61 to 62, that they match.
It's a close,
Approximately.
yes, you're not going to get an exact match, so you have to factor in what's the margin of error and look at what affects it. So I think I've done that, and we've been talking about that. But yes, it's a very close match.
And then from there, what did you do?
Well, just showed some representative, this is the first time out, that's the approximate location of Mr. Santana's phone. There's the monitors that I was piping the phone out to so I could see as I was trying to adjust the camera, hanging over the fence. And approximate distance from that to Mr. Slager is 131 feet 9 inches. So from there, using what we just saw, we go from determining the timing of the shots, and T0 is, I'll say, I won't say arbitrary, but it's where he's bent over and the elbow is up. Shot 1 was 1.49 seconds later, approximately 17 feet, 1
How
inch.
did you determine it was 1.49 seconds later?
Well, after I chose that frame that I showed previously, using a video editing and looking at the waveform for the shot 1, determine the distance or the amount of time between the two. And then 1.86 from T.
Well, let me ask you this, that red squiggle
That's
below,
the
is that a
waveform.
sound?
Yeah, it's a graphic representation of what the sound waves look like, shot
So-
1.
So shot 1, or any of the shots can be timed by timing it out
Yes.
with a stopwatch or whatever.
I'm not sure I understand stopwatch. But
Well, with a timer.
well, I'm looking at the video in a video editor saying that, okay, T0 happened at this time, T1 happened at this time. What's the difference between the two? It's 1.49 seconds.
Okay.
So we had the other 6 shots. As I said earlier, you can't do shot 8 because the video or the phone's position changes. So shot 8 is not on here visually. It is on here, and that is, the total lapse time was 4.18 seconds, and I don't have a distance for it. But
Why not?
well,
For
because
T8?
you can't link, since the camera moved, you can't link that back to this, so it can't be,
I'm sorry,
it can't be done. I apologize, I'm sorry.
on that, using that slide, it could be done on its own slide, but not,
Oh, I could, well, I'd have to look at the video again. I've looked at the little, I don't think shot 8 shows Mr. Slager in the same frame,
Frame as
so
Mr.
you
Scott.
couldn't do that. You could reference him to a different object in the frame and maybe use that to,
but not to where you had Slager, for lack of a better term, anchored.
right. If you
Using
watch the
that.
video, his feet are anchored during shots. He becomes an anchor point for that, yes. So that was the end of that section or chapter. So chapter 4 is establishing location, Mr. Scott and the taser post-shooting. Mr. Scott's point of rest. So there's a perspective view of what we just looked at, lay a measuring tape from Mr. Slager's position off to the fence, and we see if there's identifying permanent characteristics at the scene that can be tied from my photos back to the crime scene photos, and there's a rather large anthill and an embedded rock at the location I'm showing here. It starts at 52 feet. It ends at roughly 54 feet, approximately 54 feet. That rock is embedded into the ground, so we have a 52 to 54 foot range there. And when you look at the scene photos, you can see that's the same rock, and you can see the anthill off to the right. There's ants on Mr. Scott's arm. And the same rock that we're seeing roughly is about the 52 feet. So it gives a range or an idea of where Mr. Scott ended up, except it wasn't one of the things that was measured during the work. And then the taser point of rest position covers 9:37:49 to 9:37:51:20. Matching the camera matching taser's point of rest. Same process. Here's a frame capture that shows the taser in the highlighted circle, and that's the setup. It advanced each time we went out there. We tried to make things work a little smoother. So there's the setup, and there's that fixture I built that allows me to move left and right on that axis, allows me to move towards me in the camera or away, go up and down, and then it has a dual tripod head that allows me to change the angle of the camera itself. I built that just for this job. There's a little closer view of it. It's actually a combination of a few different apparatuses and a couple that I built. There's the monitor, there's the transparencies that I discussed, there's a sun box so I can see them clearer. So we're back to frame 434. There's my match to the camera, to the taser location. Now the hat right there, I wasn't trying to match the hat. That hat was our hat and got displaced, but the taser off to the right and the yellow oval is what the match is. So based on that, we dropped the plumb bob on top of it, did our measurements, and located the taser. There's it in reference to the other scene markers that we already discussed. And we pulled a tape from Mr. Slager's position. I will note during firing back to the taser, I did not recreate his position during the struggle. So it would actually be stepped back from there. Mr. Slager's actual position would be back a small distance. Okay, chapter 5 is establishing the audio anchor points for the timeline. So here's the evidence we had the possibility to link as far as media goes. We have Santana's cell phone video, we have Slager's in-car audio, video audio, the dispatch audio, Mr. Scott's cell phone records, and the taser log times. Then we talked about scene evidence, now we want to link that back into all of that. So here's a perspective view from our drone with a 3D model of Mr. Slager's patrol car, Mr. Scott's car, and the two cars in the parking lot. Slager's in-car video, lapel mic, file name at 6 minutes, 24 seconds, MPEG 4. Can we sync the video? No, it's a standalone video. There's nothing we can sync visually with it. Can we sync the audio? Yes. What? With the dispatch. So here's a graphic representation of the dispatch audio. It's just a picture of what the waveform looks like. Its file name, its length, it's 2 hours and 33 minutes. Windows Media. Can't do anything with video because there is none. We can sync the audio to both the in-car audio lapel mic and also Santana's cell phone. It becomes the link in the chain between those two. So the last is the cell phone, same properties as far as the length and file information. So I discussed this earlier, I won't spend much time on it. We're going to find the same event in two of the medias and then use that as the aligning mechanism. We're going to do
And
that.
that's what you were explaining to the judge earlier about aligning the same sounds from
Yes.
one medium on the other.
Yes.
Media.
Media. So if we take a look at the call from Mr. Slager to dispatch. Okay, that becomes a good anchor point with Mr. Slager's lapel mic. If you play the unenhanced, he's saying the same thing. If you run the filters I mentioned earlier, give you a little better idea of what you're hearing. Both of them say the same thing. So that, you just take the two waveforms and zoom in, you bring it in, keep playing until you get, they're on top of each other. That aligns the two.
That's two different, that's the lapel or the...
Lapel on the top and dispatch in the center.
But two different sources
Two
that
different-
you're lining up.
Two different sources aligned through that event on each source. So then we have Officer Haversham's audio track from dispatch.
You my car against the girls who were behind the pawn shop. And the rest of you.
I picked that one because I knew it was also on Santana's, or Mr. Santana's cell phone. So if we listen to that,
So that was the dispatch first, and then Fame Santana's video where you heard the same language.
yes.
Okay.
So I did the same process, aligned those two waveforms so they were right on top of each other. Here's a little demonstration that you hear the echo effect, that's when they're not aligned. So you work with them until they are aligned. So the echo's gone away. So here's the aligned three pieces of media. We have video for this Mr. Slager's in-car video. We don't have, of course, video for an audio file, and then we have video from Mr. Santana's cell phone. So we have basically 1 minute and 24 seconds where we have audio but no video.
I'm sorry, how long?
1 minute and 24 seconds. So then we look at the taser clock drift, which I'm sure was explained earlier, but we just review it quickly. The taser report, the recognition hadn't been synced in a while, 15 minutes 34. Taser's involvement to figure out the total clock drift, and their result back to the solicitor. Now, if you adjust all the times for the adjusted, there's the table of it. It's 15 minutes, 28.5 seconds. In looking at the syncing of the three medias we just discussed, we've got taser number 6, which is 9:37:33 to 9:37:38, 5-second duration. And if we listen to Mr. Santana's cell phone video, the very front part of it, we hear I can turn that up. We hear the clicking at the very front part of it, which I used as my anchor point for the Taser 6. So when I make the alignment, I pulled the Taser times to match with that. And that was the last adjustment to align it with the other three pieces of media. So we have an additional column that I added, and that is, instead of the Taser drift, it's now offset by 3 seconds, and that's the outcome of that. It shifts all the tasers that distance. And lastly, is the end result of all of this. Takes just a second to load, it's a big file. There we go. So, the anchored and synchronized timeline. Everything I just showed we used to basically create what we're going to see here, from the point where Mr. Scott was stopped to the end of the video 1 of Mr. Santana. 2 versions created, with or without audio. To understand what you're going to be seeing is the clock in the top left corner has been synced with the dispatch or the in-car video time. I use that as my anchor time, and I can explain why in the testing I did to establish that as what I think is an accurate anchor point. We monitor Mr. Scott's cell phone status over to the left there. That phone will turn green if he's on the phone. There were 3 calls that overlapped, especially with the last one marked in red. So if he's on the phone, it'll be green. The event clock is synced with the clock at the bottom, and that's a rolling clock. And underneath it will be events. There'll be past, current. Past is the one that shows the timer. The warning underneath that, that's the start of that event, and that will be moving as you see the video going. And the upcoming events are off to the right. That's a dynamic timeline. It'll be moving in sync with the video and the clock up at the top left. The past events are off to the left. It gives an idea of what's coming. Taser, if the taser has nothing around it, the taser is not in use. If it's in use, it's highlighted, and the number, there's 6 tasings in this incident. The number of the tasing will be incrementally changed based on the taser, or the tasing taking place. So then we incorporate our visual evidence, the scene evidence as a visual, enlarge the markers so you can see them and give an idea where they were in relationship to what's happening. And you see underneath the scrolling timeline at the bottom, we're in taser 1. What's coming up is 5 seconds of nothing, and then there's going to be a warning, so all that will be dynamic. As we just said, there's no video for 1:24, so the screen's going to be just blank like this, and all we're going to hear is audio from the various sources, mainly the dispatch, some from Mr. Slager's lapel mic, and then of course when Santana's video kicks in. It's in 2 orientations. It's portrait to begin with, and then it goes landscape. So when it's portrait, it will show like this. When it's landscape, it will take more or less the full screen. And that brings us to the work product of everything we just looked at.
On a great car stage, at 1318 golf ball.
Sorry. Your Honor, I'm going to play it straight instead of out of PowerPoint so that there's no jerkiness in the playback.
On a great car stage, at 1318 golf ball.
One down, three current blue hands down Craig Street. I'm in short and emergency status due to 226 on
Copy on it. Interrupt, historical code.
Down everything.
Interrupt the hell. What's your difference out there? What we got now? Turn right down West Street. Turn right down. Yellow driveway to the watch out. I'll come over and that way now. 567 up. Go. 55 dispatch. Can you call for today?
Remount Road next to the main man and the fire station.
Service in there, pawn shop, where you at now? 613 dispatch on spot. Subject is down. You heard my taser.
223 John Slager, you grab your taser, subject is down. And 938.
34 copies, another route.
938.
One's in there, yeah. I'm kind of low now.
938.
Watch up. Over.
First, are you,
Come to the watch out. Dispatch. I need to secure
Park 223.
Ralphie, where's the
Toyota was the location of the stop.
With a vehicle, manslaughter.
241, carrying vehicle and manslaughter.
223 and 10-4. Everyone 10-4, jump to the suspect. They put a cut behind the squad shot when they can't. Gunshot wound. Present the chest. To the right side. All responses. Copy. Make sure the scene is secure by that. Locate another gunshot wound to the spine. Everybody's around now.
Location of the gunshot victim.
Pawn shop. If you see my car, that's Gerald. We're behind the pawn shop. The Raptor Field.
Referring to Mega Pawn on Rivers. 64 was that. That's probably at 940.
That's the end of the timeline, should we have, correct?
Yes.
Do you have any questions for the witness on those matters, Your Honor, before we argue or discuss more of his qualifications?
In what way do you use reverse engineering to assist you with doing what you did?
The reverse projection,
Yes.
the location, the process of finding the camera location is the reverse projection photogrammetry. Basically, you identify the location you think the camera is, and then you work with it until you get the match. Once you get the match, then you put the objects back in, work with them until they match the source, and there's your end result.
That are visible,
That are, yes,
that's not reading data, that's just looking at the match, the red, the pink lines, the black lines, the yellow lines, and seeing that they coincide.
yeah, once you do that, then you add the objects, which are the silhouettes.
In what way does your expertise differ from, are you familiar with the term computer forensics?
Yes, Your Honor.
In what way does your expertise differ, if it does, from computer forensics?
The methodology of the photogrammetry process I just outlined is applied in that broader field of computer forensics, but because of the source video, not, at least in myself and the young man that works with me's opinion, lend itself to using a different methodology, plus the task was that I wanted an approximate location between the two people. We opted for that route. It can be done other ways.
All right, I have no other questions.
Ma'am,
Yes.
in doing the reverse camera match, you used a computer and a model cell phone, an exemplar cell phone like Baby Santana, correct?
No, the cell phone was piped directly to a monitor standalone.
Okay.
The monitor just served as a bigger screen for the cell phone to allow me to do the positioning more accurately.
To do it by hand?
Yeah, it was done by hand.
Manually.
Yes.
Okay. And, Baby,
Yes,
And it can be repeated, and you did repeat it.
yes, I did.
And then after the matches are made, you just stretch out a tape measure
Yes,
after those positions are set.
yes.
Anything further from anyone prior to my ruling? Yes, sir.
Judge, I have just a couple of things, please. Obviously, a lot of work went into that presentation. We're very concerned about what was the basis for the presentation. That is the initial measurements taken, and apparently he disagrees with the State Law Enforcement Division measurements and had to replicate the entire scene again, which seems unusual to us. Secondly, the photography or videography upon which he based his measurements, once again we go back to the video enhancement and stabilization. We don't know what source documents he used. Was the Santana video used for the camera matching position? Was that his? Was that the original Santana video? Was that the FBI enhanced version of the video? What was used for the camera matching? Because it makes a big difference. It makes a difference in the images that are seen and how they're processed. And we also have some fundamental objections with some of the slides in there that depict, for example, the memorial and some of the positions of Mr. Scott, but those could be taken care of. But we think we're still in the same position we were, Judge. If you don't start from a known position, then no matter how much work you put into it, there's just more induced error. And if I could, I'd like to show, just as an example, a couple of photos, if I could, to understand what we're talking about. Mr. Williams, I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit number 48.
Okay.
Do you recognize the top?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know what the image is on the bottom there?
According to the label, original image.
That would be a non-scraped image, one that was taken out of the L3 player with all the frames.
Well, what you see basically is that the player that I captured out of is cropping the image. The taillight, the right rear taillight of the vehicle is cropped where you see it in the bottom. So it's not, I looked at that, it's not an aspect ratio error, because if you were to unhide what's been cropped off, you'd get the rest of the image. The image has been cropped.
But you would agree with me, wouldn't you, that in a case like this where seconds and inches make a difference, that...
I can't show it to anybody, but...
We can put it up on the screen.
Yeah, you see the whole car in the bottom image. You see the car sliced in the top image. It's not an aspect ratio, which is me squishing this, that, or the other thing. It's that the viewer I was able to view the video out of is automatically cropping it.
the top position here, Mr. Williams, would be off of your straight
No,
video
you're-
from the L3 camera, is that correct?
What I'm seeing is the bottom one, your
Oh,
original.
I'm sorry, here you go.
Yeah, and if you look at the right rear taillight, it's cut. Part of the car's not showing in that frame. Now, if you slide it up, the whole car comes back in. It's not that I squashed the image, it's that the viewer is only showing me to that part of the car. I couldn't control that.
Do you see any difference at all in the appearance? Let me see. In the appearance of the duty belt in the two photos? And the clarity of the image?
Sure, I'll have to admit to that there's a difference in the two. I'm getting some glare off of the top image, but on your Elmo, I can't remember. There's a little bit of difference in the two.
Okay, and then I have a couple of others. So the fact is that this the video that you captured only contains half the frames that the L3 system captured, and it can lead to erroneous interpretation by the jury. I mean, if we're going to show them something, we need to show them something that is a fair and accurate representation and not showing half the frames. Wouldn't you agree?
If it changed the output, I would definitely agree. The output on the two, you see an object in Mr. Scott's hands, both first time out of the car and second time out of the car, whether half the frames are missing or not.
And what did you determine your camera matching on the distance calculations you did? What screenshot did you use? What image did you use?
It was marked on the slideshow. I think it's frame 456 for
Is that
shot
from the
one.
FBI enhanced, or is that your enhancement? What?
That's original.
It's original from the Santana video itself?
Yes, sir.
And did you use the original Santana video in your presentation?
Yes, sir. Other than the audio track on it, had a couple filters applied on the version we had, but I have other versions without that applied. But the video was original.
I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as Defendant's Exhibit 49. Do you know why there's a difference in those images? Do you know where that blur comes from?
Now, without looking into it,
But you would agree that those are different images, correct?
there's differences between the two, yes.
top, there's an image. On the bottom is the image was captured from your video, which shows some amount of blur or imprecision in each of these three screenshots that were captured.
Judge, I would object to Mr. McCune's testimony about frames captured. There's been no testimony that those are the same frames. Mr. McCune's alleging that, but I don't know that or have anything to base that on.
Judges,
There's no
I'm sorry.
foundation for that.
the solicitor has been testifying most of the afternoon to assist Mr. Williams in his presentation, and I'm just trying to assist the court in knowing that the presentation can be incorrect and misleading. Let me ask Mr. Williams, when you measured the crime scene, you said one of the issues you had is you didn't know where SLED had measured the crime scene. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
You talked about getting the points, the poles that were used
as far as
reference points, reference poles, if you will.
As far as what their reference points were?
Right.
Yes, after we were at the scene, we recognized the error, and upon investigation found out that we couldn't ascertain, was it the circumference of the pole or the center of the pole? Couldn't get an answer to that question.
So what did you choose to do your measurements?
We roughed it in with the SLED measurements, and then we did the rock inspection, and the